It started with the girl on the bench. For almost a week, I saw her there, motionless, like a shadow anchored beneath the big oak tree in the small park off Michigan Avenue. She sat with her hands locked tightly in her lap, her eyes far away, fixed on something invisible, something haunting. It was late September and the chill was creeping in, but she never flinched. Not when the wind kicked up leaves around her feet. Not when the rain spat down from the gray sky. She just sat there, silent and unyielding, like a ghost waiting to be noticed. At first, I told myself to leave it alone. People find strange ways to cope. Maybe she was grieving. Maybe she was lost. But by the fourth day, I couldn't shake the heavy weight of her loneliness. There was something wrong. It was written all over her face. The hollow eyes, the drawn lips, the kind of sadness that doesn't fade. On the fifth day, I gave in. I approached cautiously, my hands shoved in my pockets to make myself look harmless. "Hey," I said, my voice soft but deliberate. "Are you okay? You've been here a lot." She startled, her head jerking up like she hadn't even noticed me approach. Up close, she looked even more fragile, skin pale, hair messy, dark circles etched under her eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like broken glass. "I don't know," she whispered, barely audible. "I don't know what I'm doing." I hesitated, torn between giving her space and the overwhelming need to help. "Do you need someone? A friend? Someone to call?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head sharply. "No one. I have no one. I lost everything." Her words hit like a gut punch. I sat down, not too close, just enough to let her know I wasn't leaving. "I'm Eli," I said after a long pause. "What's your name?" Her voice trembled. "Amira." It took time, but little by little, the dam broke. She told me she was from Morocco, that she had fled a life she couldn't bear, only to find herself stranded here, friendless, jobless, and out of hope. As she spoke, her words came in bursts, her accent delicate and trembling. And as she unraveled her story, I saw her for what she really was, a woman teetering on the edge of collapse, hanging on by the thinnest thread. "Listen," I said gently, "you don't have to figure everything out tonight. Let's start small. I can help you find your footing, okay?" Her eyes met mine, desperate and searching. After what felt like forever, she nodded. "Okay." Over the next few weeks, I kept my promise. I took her to Millennium Park to see the bean. We walked along the river, and I even got her to laugh when she tried deep dish pizza for the first time. Slowly, she began to thaw, like winter giving way to spring. But even as she started to bloom, shadows lingered. There were things she didn't tell me, things that made her eyes go dark and her voice fade when I pressed. I told myself it didn't matter. She would tell me when she was ready. In the process, something unexpected happened between us. One night, after too many drinks and too many vulnerable confessions, we ended up in bed. And then it happened again. I won't lie, I enjoyed it. Amira had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. And when she looked at me, it was impossible not to want her. She was stunning, exotic. When she let her guard down, she looked like an oriental queen. But deep down, I knew it was never meant to be more than a good adventure. Then came the night everything changed. I brought Amira to a small gathering at my friend Eric's apartment. He had been hollow since his wife died, and I thought maybe some company would help. I never expected what happened next. The moment Amira stepped into the room, it was like someone flipped a switch. People turned to look, especially Eric. His eyes latched onto her, and for the first time in months, I saw him light up. And Amira? She noticed him too. What started as polite conversation quickly spiraled into something deeper. Eric offered to show her around, just like I had, and she jumped at the chance. Soon, they were inseparable. Late-night talks, long walks by the lake, stolen glances that felt too intimate too fast. Eric was alive again, and I wanted to be happy for him. But something about the way Amira looked at him, like he was a lifeline, sent shivers through me. And the way Eric looked at her? Like a man already falling too fast to catch himself. One night, Eric pulled me aside. "I think I'm in love with her," he said, his voice shaky but certain. "She's incredible. She makes me feel alive again." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, a knot tightened in my stomach. "Are you sure?" I asked, careful not to sound judgmental. "You don't really know her yet." "I know enough," he insisted. "She needs me, and I think I need her too." I swallowed the doubt creeping up my throat and nodded. Maybe this was what they both needed. Someone to save and someone to be saved. And maybe I needed to let her go. After all, I had enough women in my life. Amira had just been a chapter, a thrilling one, but a chapter nonetheless. Eric? He needed the whole book, but it didn't take long for cracks to form. Amira stopped returning my calls as often. When I did see her, she seemed distant, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. Once, I caught her on the phone, speaking urgently in a language I didn't understand. When I asked, she brushed it off. "It's nothing," she said, her smile brittle. "Just family stuff." But it didn't feel like nothing. The cracks started small, barely noticeable at first. Eric was head over heels. But Amira? She started to change. She stopped answering my texts as often, and when I did see her, something was different. Her eyes were guarded, her smile thinner, like a mask she was struggling to hold up. One night, I caught her outside a cafe, talking on the phone in a language I didn't understand. Her voice was sharp, urgent, nothing like the soft, uncertain girl I had met on that bench. When I asked about it, she brushed me off. "It's just family stuff," she said, but it didn't feel like family stuff. Then Eric dropped the bombshell. "I'm going to propose," he said, his face lit up like a kid at Christmas. "She's the one, Eli. I've never been more sure of anything." My stomach sank. "Are you sure about this?" I asked carefully. "You've only known her for a couple of months." "I don't care," he said. "She makes me feel alive again, and she needs me." Eric started spending money he didn't have. Rings, dresses, decorations. He even took out a loan, all for Amira, all because he believed she was the answer to everything he'd lost. I tried to be supportive, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. And then I saw her. It was late one evening. I had stopped by a friend's restaurant in a rough part of town to fix his computer. When I stepped outside, I saw her. Amira. She was wearing something that made my blood run cold. Tight. Revealing. Nothing like the fragile girl who once sat trembling under that oak tree. She walked up to a sleek car, leaned inside, and disappeared. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the image burned itself into my brain, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen the real Amira for the first time, and it terrified me. I didn't tell Eric what I saw. How could I? It wasn't solid proof, just a gnawing feeling in my gut and an image of Amira stepping into that car. Eric was so blinded by love, so desperate for happiness, that I knew he'd brush it off as paranoia. Without evidence, it would only drive a wedge between us, and I couldn't risk losing him as a friend. But I couldn't let it go. The image of her slipping into that car wouldn't leave me, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next night, I drove back to that neighborhood, the one where I'd seen her, and parked my car a block away. I told myself I'd stay for an hour, maybe two, just to see if it was a fluke. But deep down, I knew I was hoping for something more. Hours passed, and the street buzzed with activity. Cars rolling by, people laughing, the distant hum of music. I was starting to think I'd been wrong when around midnight, she appeared. Amira. She was dressed to kill, heels that clicked against the pavement, a dress that clung to her like a second skin. She looked nothing like the fragile girl I'd met under the oak tree. This Amira was confident, calculating, and in complete control. My heart sank as I watched her approach a car, lean in, and then climb into the passenger seat. I sat there, frozen. This couldn't be real, but it was. I waited, and then I saw her again and again. Over the course of the night, Amira got into several cars, each one more expensive than the last. Every time, she stayed for 15, maybe 20 minutes before stepping out and moving to the next. My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. This wasn't the Amira Eric thought he knew. This wasn't the Amira I thought I knew. It was past 3 a.m. when she climbed into her final car of the night, a sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows. This time, I decided to follow. I kept my distance, my headlights dimmed, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. The car weaved through the city streets before pulling into a dark, secluded alley. I parked a block away and crept closer on foot, staying in the shadows. And then I saw it. Through the dim light of the alley, I saw Amira in the back seat with the driver, a tall, well-dressed Arab man. They were close, too close. My stomach twisted as they leaned into each other, their movements unmistakable. She wasn't just sitting there, they were making love. I wanted to capture the moment, to have something, anything, to show Eric. I reached for my phone, but when I pressed the button, the screen stayed black. Dead. Of all the nights for my battery to fail me, it had to be this one. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. The wedding was 2 days away, and I had to stop it. Eric deserved to know the truth, but how could I convince him without evidence? How could I make him see what I'd seen? The next morning, I tried calling Eric, but he didn't answer. When I stopped by his place, his roommates said he was too busy with last-minute preparations. I felt helpless, trapped between my loyalty to my friend and the horrible truth I now carried. But I was determined. I couldn't let this wedding happen, not when I knew what Amira was hiding. Unfortunately, I wasn't the only one who felt that way. 2 days later, the day of the wedding, everything unraveled. The wedding was a spectacle, lavish, almost surreal. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting golden light across the massive ballroom. Flowers adorned every table, and waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. It was the kind of event you'd see in movies, grand, extravagant, and utterly over the top. And there was Amira. She was breathtaking. Her dress clung to her like it was stitched from moonlight, shimmering with every step she took. Her dark hair flowed in soft waves, framing her face like the queen she always seemed to be. But her eyes, they were cold, calculated, the same eyes I had seen in that alley. I stood near the back, clutching a drink I hadn't touched, my heart pounding against my ribs. Eric, on the other hand, looked like a man reborn. He couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop looking at her like she was his salvation. I wanted to tell him, God, I wanted to tell him everything. But there was never a moment. People swarmed him, congratulated him, shook his hand. Every time I tried to pull him aside, someone else cut in. I felt like I was suffocating. Then came the toast. The master of ceremonies, a loud, booming man with a crooked smile, raised his glass and grinned. Well, folks, before we move on to the real celebration, let's do this the old-fashioned way, shall we? He turned to the crowd, his voice echoing across the room. If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. Laughter rippled through the audience. It was meant to be a joke, just another tradition no one took seriously. But as I stared at Eric, smiling like the happiest man alive, something in me snapped. I opened my mouth. But before I could speak, a voice cut through the air like a blade. I object! The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the back, where a man stepped forward. He was short, stocky, and wore a suit that looked a size too big. His dark eyes burned with something raw. Anger, betrayal, maybe both. I object, he said again, louder this time, because that woman, he pointed a trembling finger at Amira, is my wife. Gasps erupted across the room. People turned to Amira, who stood frozen at the altar, her face drained of color. What is this? Eric's voice cracked. What are you talking about? The man stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. "My name is Hassan," he said. "And that woman, her name is not Amira, her name is Amina. She is my wife, the mother of my child, and she ran away." Eric staggered back, his face pale. "She abandoned me," Hassan continued, his voice shaking with fury. "She abandoned our son, a 1-year-old boy she left in my arms. She cheated on me in Morocco and fled with an American. And now here she is, pretending to be someone else, while I've been searching for her for months." The silence in the room was suffocating. "She thinks she can hide here, but she cannot. In our country, marriage is sacred. There is no divorce, and I have come to take her back." Eric turned to Amira, his voice barely a whisper. "Is this true?" Amira's eyes flashed, not with fear, but with fury. She stepped off the altar and stormed toward Hassan, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "You have no right!" she spat, her voice venomous. "You can't control me anymore. I'm free. I don't owe you anything." "You owe me your vows," Hassan roared, "and you owe your son a mother." The room was spinning. Eric swayed on his feet, and before anyone could reach him, he collapsed. A waiter caught him just as his knees buckled, and guests rushed to help. But Amira didn't flinch. She turned to Hassan, her face twisted with rage. "I will never go back with you," she hissed. "Then I will go to the police," Hassan shot back. "You are here illegally, and they will send you home." For the first time, fear flickered across Amira's face. She glanced around the room, her eyes darting toward the exit. And then she ran. Before anyone could stop her, she grabbed the hem of her dress and bolted out the door. People shouted, but no one followed, no one except me. I shoved through the crowd and burst into the street, just in time to see her flag down a taxi. "Amira!" I shouted. She turned to look at me, just for a second. Her eyes burned with something wild and desperate. Then she climbed inside, and the car sped off into the night. I stood there, breathless, staring after her until the taxi disappeared around the corner. And that was it. She was gone. Back inside, Eric was coming too. His friends crowding around him, but he looked broken, like a man who had just watched his entire world shatter. Hassan stood in the corner, silent and trembling, like a man who had won but still lost. And me? I felt hollow. Because in the end, no matter what I had seen, no matter what I had tried to do, it hadn't mattered. Amira, or Amina, had left nothing but wreckage behind her. And maybe that was all she had ever known how to do.